Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glissini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 28. My guest, Dr. Mitch Greene. As a clinical and sports psychologist, Dr. Greene is the owner of Greenepsych, located in Haverford, Pennsylvania. He specializes in helping competitive athletes improve their on-the-field performances by teaching strategies to manage mind chatter, overcome self-doubt, and stay focused on their game day goals. Off the field, Dr. Greene consults with athletes who are struggling with the mental health challenges such as anxiety and depression, as well as post-career worries and fears. Today, I sit down with Dr. Greene to hear more about his story, his courageous career change 15 years ago, his philosophy around high performance, and his work in the field of sports psychology. So let's get to it. Dr. Greene, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure.
So to kick things off, I'd like to hear more about what you were up to before entering the wide world of sports. What were you involved in and what catalyzed that career change?
Yeah, it's a story I like to tell because it does fit with an athlete who's struggling with confidence. I decided to make a career change 15 years into, well, no, maybe not 15 years in, more like maybe 8 or 9 years into a clinical psychology career where I wasn't seeing athletes, and I decided to take a leap into the world of sports. So what I was doing before was I came out of graduate school as a clinician. I was working with kids on the autism spectrum. I was working with families. I was working with kids with ADD and depression and adults as well. And I had a fellowship, like a postdoctoral experience in family therapy. So I did a lot of family therapy work. But I always had my eye on sports as an athlete growing up and as someone just who's a fan. And there was a point in my business partnership with a psychiatrist friend of mine who I'm still very close with, who we owned a business together, owned a private practice together. I took stock when that partnership ended and thought, what do I really see my career looking like going forward? And it was there that I started to sort of dip my toe into the world of sports and find out what is sports psychology? The truth is I really didn't know what a sports psychologist actually did at that point. Although I was paying attention to athletes that were in the news who were struggling, like people like Steve Sachs and people like Chuck Knobloch, who was somebody I followed very closely, being a New Yorker, and he was in New York when he started to have his mental struggles. So in some ways it was a complete turnaround. And my wife said, "What are you, crazy? You're busy. You're good at what you do. People seek you out." And I said, "Yeah, but it just doesn't feel like where I see myself." And I started to leave some openings for some sport clients. I started to sort of get the words out of my mouth that I'm now practicing as a sports psychologist. Of course, I went to conferences. I'm someone who's willing to ask questions and ask for help when I need it. And one thing led to another. And before I knew it, well, it wasn't really before I knew it. I take that back. It really wasn't before I knew it. It was a lot of hard work and a lot of long days. So eventually, I got to the place now where I'm almost exclusively working in sports. But as you mentioned in my intro, sometimes on the mental health side of it, and then sometimes on the performance side of it.
Outstanding. One of the questions I want to pull on a thread that you gave us was during that transition, how hard was it to make that flip? I know you started using the vernacular that you're going to go more into sports psychology, but for somebody that is struggling with career change or shifting right now, could you kind of just give the process or the steps that you were using?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, again, I was willing to do, and I would encourage anyone, is I really went and asked for help. I found a sports psychologist in the Philadelphia area who was former president of ASP, which is sort of the National Sports Psychology Organization. And he just happened to be in my hometown, and he's just happened to be the most likable guy around. And he's someone who walked me through it and said, look, you don't have to make this change overnight. Make this more of a gradual change. Don't give up your day job, so to speak, for this. And then he said, you need to find out more about what this profession really is before you decide it's something you want to do, and encouraged me. I flew down to Orlando where the national conference was, and I'll never forget it because I just sat in on sports psychology lectures and workshops and presentations, and I just left there saying to myself, I could do this. Like I knew, having my counseling, my clinical degree, plus hearing how they were approaching things, although I had a lot to learn, I just walked out of there flying high. And so, but it did take a lot of courage. I mean, I knew I was scared through a lot of it when I had empty spaces in my schedule that I could have otherwise filled with a client. I had empty and then didn't make money during some of those weeks, during what would be a prime time for me to see a clinical client. And so it was a little bit of a high wire act. And again, athletes can relate to this sort of high wire act, where if you don't take the risk, you don't get the reward.
I heard this saying about business during this pandemic, which was launch fast and adapt. And I think even when you go inside, and correct me if I'm wrong, with your athletes, you're still adapting all along the way. You know, my next question that I wanted to ask you was, before coming on, I asked you what you were most proud of. And you mentioned that your connection with your clientele was something that you really stood out in your mind. Could you elaborate on that and perhaps share why that intangible of empathy is so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I just continue to be humbled and flattered that people who are so busy, like the athletes that I work with, whether they're juniors who are going to school, going to practice, going to rehab, hitting the weight room, working with their specialty coaches, or Olympians and pros who, of course, have their busy schedules and obligations, that people continue to seek me out and find time to want to make room in their schedule to consult with me. I just continue to be humbled by that, and I take that very seriously. And the connection, I think, in part, that I am most appreciative of from my point of view is that it's a space where they can share things that they don't otherwise often share with anyone else. And I take great pride in that there are things that you can tell your sports psychologist that you maybe can't tell your coach, or you can't necessarily fess to your teammates or your friends. Not that I mean, I do encourage people to be open, but there's times when you need private consult. And I take great pride in being behind the scenes. This is an interesting time for me, as you know, Mark, because I'm starting to kind of come out from my office more. And this is another one of those developmental steps for me in my career. Because I feel like, I've been behind a closed door working with thousands and thousands of athletes for a long time. And but to answer your question, the connection is that I take great pride in, is that people should share things with me that they don't otherwise often share, and that they keep seeking me out and want to fit me in to their schedule because they obviously see the benefit of our consult. So
I love it. What comes to mind is, every next chapter or new level in your life is going to require a different version of you, and we already touched upon that in the first 2 or 3 questions here, which translates right into my next question that I had prepared for you was, when I talk with peers and mentors about the top elements that lead to excellence, as well as the top reasons why performers do not find success. Do you mind sharing your philosophy on that? As a 2-part question here, it would be, what are the common characteristics you see among high performers? And then what sort of things tend to get in the way?
Yeah. Well, let me start with what gets in the way, because that's usually what I'm asked to respond to and help with. So there's lots of things that get in the way, and we could dig deeper into the ones that you want to. Certainly, we'll talk about mind chatter. So that's sort of that fear-based conversation that is full of doubt and second guessing and negativity. That certainly gets in the way. And relatedly, perfectionism gets in the way. Sort of obsessive thinking gets in the way. Just to give you a quick example, I was working with a face-off guy yesterday, a college face-off guy, and who has done all the right things in terms of his training, and his preparation, going back a long way. And he's coming to realize that his obsessiveness about his approach to facing off has its benefits, clearly, and then it also has its costs. And that the second something doesn't quite feel right, like going to a different field and the turf feeling differently, or the grass feeling differently, or the atmosphere in which the game is being played, certainly during COVID, it looks differently. And so in that case, it's sort of his, for lack of a better word, his perfectionism, his obsessiveness, while it works against him, is clearly working. Works for him is clearly also working against him. So that's something that gets in the way. Trying to live up to other people's expectations, trying to prove something to someone, sometimes can help, but sometimes gets in the way. That gets into this topic of side games, which maybe we can talk about a little bit later.
Sure thing.
The fear of not meeting expectations, the fear of disappointing people, and the fear of embarrassment. Those are the top three for me, just to cut to that I often circle back to with my athletes, because those tend to be the things that get in the way of them performing.
And that again, I think it goes hand in hand with the questions and answers we've been having. But that in and of itself is a process as well. Could you talk a little bit about that? How it's not a light switch?
Well, yeah, I think I know what you mean. So, someone comes in to see me and they're struggling, and they often don't know why, or they have a sense of it and they're not sure why, because, as I said, maybe they've done everything. And most of the athletes, if not all the athletes I see, are the kind of athletes that you know and you work with. Are people who I don't need to tell them to work hard. I don't need to tell them how to get off the couch and make time to train. These are the people who, if anything, we sometimes try to get them to dial it back rather than turn it up. And they struggle to understand why it is that they're not performing, because they're doing everything right. So that often leads to a conversation of them of me asking them sort of what's at stake in terms of what it is they're trying to accomplish. Why, ultimately getting to the place that, let's say in practice, there's really nothing at stake, because no one's posting their goals, or how many assists they had. It is the place where they can make mistakes and not feel like it cost them. But of course, in a game time situation, the conversation winds up being not just what's at stake in terms of goals scored or assists made or ground balls picked up, but this deeper conversation about what's really at stake here. And they often need to be led there. And that conversation usually winds up getting to, my reputation is at stake, my ego is at stake, my disappointing others is at stake, who I thought I was or am as a player, my identity at stake. And of course, if all those things are at stake, embarrassment, it's a little hard to focus on ground balls if it feels like the entire world will crumble if something doesn't go according to plan. And so a lot of the work that I do is having conversations around becoming more aware about the stakes in which they're playing under, and seeing that they have some choice about that, or discussing, do they feel like they have any choice about that? And getting them to see that all the stuff that's at stake really doesn't have anything to do with lacrosse per se. Lacrosse is balls and sticks and dodges and et cetera. And then helping walk them through the process of managing that chatter, so that they can step on the field and feel like they could show all their hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just last night, I was watching the Baylor versus UConn Elite Eight women's basketball game. Very intense, high pressure. And you see the UConn lady gets put to the line, and she misses probably like three key free throws, on the other end of the court, you have a Baylor player who's just sinking them and allowing that to come back. And I'm just enthralled in that moment, right? Because you see them go to their process, and some of them are dealing with that mind chatter that you're talking about. I was just listening to a podcast with a guy named Dr. Ethan Cross, who talks a lot about self-control and emotion, harnessing that voice. He brought up this story of Rafael Nadal. And in Rafael Nadal's autobiography, he says, the hardest thing I do in any match is harness that voice inside my head. And you'll see a lot of how Rafael Nadal micromanages his rituals just so he can control the exterior and hopefully control the interior. You mentioned a book that you're working on that involves this mind chatter. Could you share some of the insights and highlights around your book?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier on being humbled that people want to make the time and into their busy schedules. And one of the things that people kept coming back and saying to me was Dr. Greene, they would, before I even asked them to kind of keep mind chatter in mind, even though we discussed the topic, they would come back and say, my mind chatter this and my mind chatter that. So I knew I was onto something because they were using it and taking it, and it was somehow a way to think about that voice in their head, and it kind of gave it a name. And so the book is about my work, very sort of stepwise, how I'll work with an athlete, whether it's at a level of a Nadal or a junior athlete. In many ways, it's similar, and teach them about why they're having the chatter in the first place and why it shows up in very specific conditions. I do feel like I'm a teacher at heart, so I'm teaching them why it shows up, when it shows up, and get them to see the predictability of it, because otherwise they're caught off guard. They can't believe the chatter's there, and then they're busy expending way too much energy trying to fight with it and get on top of it. And then the more you fight with it, the more it fights back, as you know. So I go through a lot about the sort of the scriptedness of the chatter, why it shows up and when it shows up, and then of course how to manage it when it does show up, which is more of an acceptance-based approach, more of a making room for chatter, and changing the relationship the athlete has to the chatter, versus the approach that many seem to have, which is, I've got to get rid of it. It's a sign of trouble, right? That's a big one. The idea that they have chatter, and then the athlete has chatter about having chatter, and there they are about to play. I call that sort of the double whammy, right? Like, oh my God, I'm not supposed to be thinking this. I'm not supposed to be feeling this way. This is so screwed up. All week I had the best week of practice. I was killing it. And then they take that as a sign of trouble, and then they're doomed, right? So we sort of talk about how to make room for it, create space for it, welcome it to the party, thank it for sharing. And we go through lots of kind of examples. I'm certainly not the only one who talks about chatter, if you will, in this way, but there just does seem to be something about the way I guess I package it and explain it that I get a lot of head nods. I get a lot of, oh, that makes sense. And then we kind of come up with a mental game plan for the athlete to manage the chatter and then refocus on the goals that they want to focus on. And I do spend as much time on goal setting as I do on chatter, because they often, as you know, Mark, sort of set these global goals, like I want to play well, which is, from a sports psychologist point of view, a waste.
Right. I just love
doesn't want to play well, in other words.
I love how you say you package, right? I like how you said, welcome it to the party. Something that I talk about for myself even is, why act like pressure doesn't exist? Pressure definitely exists. And I use the term, hold hands with pressure, right? Because I like how you brought up, develop a relationship about it. The best way I've ever heard pressure be explained to the negative is, imagine yourself carrying a beach ball and you go out into the ocean and you submerge it underwater, and the further you push it down, what happens, right? So I love how you're getting a nod out of me as well, just as well as you do with your athletes. Mm-hmm. I'm endlessly fascinated about the nurture side of development, specifically your early influences, what got you into this, the mentors you had. You briefly brought them up earlier, but who were some of your earliest influences that even got you into psychology altogether?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually in advertising 2 years out of college. because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a psych major and I liked it, but I wasn't ready to jump into a career in psych. I often have to remind the college students today that, it's, of course, they think they have to know exactly where, they have to have it mapped out. But my parents encouraged me because they knew I was good with people. I was like, I was the camp counselor that kids really, kind of bonded to, and et cetera, et cetera. But I still didn't know, even when I stepped foot in the clinical psych program in Philly at Temple, that this was going to be exactly what I wanted. But I did come across a professor who was different than others, and he was sort of the mentor. His name is Dr. Jay Efron. He was and still is the mentor that has made the biggest difference in my career in a number of ways. First of all, he would invite me to sit literally by his side and get him coffee while he wrote articles, and he would put my name on those articles, and I really had no business having my name on the article. It was really written by him, and I was there as just a support to him, and might make some editorial suggestions. But his approach was very much of the approach that I have now, which is very much an acceptance-based approach. The idea is that we have thoughts, but we're not our thoughts. About that what you resist will persist, and that what you let be will let you be. These sort of Buddhist, Eastern, acceptance-based approaches, not judging thoughts in the way as rational even or as irrational, but that all thoughts are legitimate. So he was a big part of, he is and was a big part of my career. And then I continue to take those lessons into my sport work. Again, others are doing acceptance-based work, but that's kind of why I'm sort of doing it. It works also, you mentioned, Mark, in your own life. There's nothing I say or talk about with an athlete that I don't work on and try to do myself, right? So when I have big presentations or writing a book, where I'm lacking confidence or I'm not sure, I have doubts, everything I'm talking to about letting mind chatter come and go absolutely applies to everything that I'm doing. I've field tested everything that I've talked about.
Sure.
So if I talk about it, I know it's at least worked for me.
Yeah, there's an authenticity that comes with that. Speaking of field tested, I just want to probe, do you use anything from the advertising world in your work now? The idea of range comes to mind, the book, where it kind of is like, can you use your past and funnel it into the work that you're doing today? Is there any way in which you still use advertising in your work?
It's a good question. Very indirectly, I am. The thing that I took most from that experience was, as a young guy out of college, the long story short is, before I knew it, I was being asked I was in the human resources department. So I was not in the creative side of things because I was a human resources minor and a psych major at Boston College. But I quickly somehow got seen as competent and was sent up to the president's office from the head of the human resources to deliver messages. Remember, this was pre sort of, emails and stuff. And I got great confidence. I realized the best part of that job was I realized that even though I was much younger than everybody else, that I had a good head on my shoulders, and I knew that people could, if I put my thoughts together, people were willing to listen. And I gained a lot of traction there and a lot of admirers there. And I think that gave me the chutzpah and the guts to say, maybe I could become more than just a guy in human resources. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that really wasn't my dream. And so indirectly, that advertising experience had a lot to do with where I am today. And interestingly, my kids, I mentioned, are college age. They're beginning their post-grad careers very soon. And they're having a little bit of this experience themselves where they realize, I might be only like 21 years old, but I realize that I'm in this room at meetings and people are listening to me like, maybe I do have something to say. And I'm trying to say to them, yes, please don't assume because people are twice your age that they have more experience than you, but they may not have as much insight or knowledge as you. So anyway, to answer your question, that's how I saw that advertising experience.
Yeah. And I love how you just took us on like the self-actualization of yourself there. That was pretty remarkable. I want to go from the macro to the micro into your life a little bit and just ask you, people are in different professions and roles for different reasons. And so one of the things I want to ask you is what drives you? What makes you tick? What are some of the things that you do on a day-to-day or a week-to-week to keep yourself energized in the work that you do?
What keeps me energized in the work that I do? Well, the clients keep me energized. I do sort of look at it. I was thinking about this before the podcast. I was thinking, I kind of do approach my life in psychology as I do with sport. Like I I love getting in front of clients because it's unscripted. I don't know what's going to happen. I kind of have a sense about where I want things to go, but I can't just focus on the outcome because then I'll miss what's going on in the meanwhile. And so just like in my athletic life where I get a thrill out of trying to see what's going to happen and how good I can be, my clients challenge me to discover also how good I can be.
Mm.
And I get great energy from that because I embrace that challenge every day, whether it's somebody who's trying to make the Olympic Games, whether it's somebody trying to set a personal record, whether it's someone trying to hang on to a team, or whether it's someone looking to get recruited. Um, I I try to rise up to that challenge and get emboldened by them. But I think you're also sort of asking, how do I need to, you're right, take very good care of myself because I spend a lot of energy. It does. And I think one of the ways I've done that over the years, Mark, is I don't see as many people as I used to. I used to, do more is better and 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 focus on volume as a young guy, just sort of, but I've learned that it takes a toll on me. Not just because I'm getting older, but because of I think just the passion that I have, and I'm not willing to take the hit in the same way that I used to. I used to get sick a lot. I used to, have trouble sleeping, and so one of the ways I take care of myself is saying, I'm now going to see X amount of people versus Y amount of people. And a big deal for me as a one-man band here is I brought in some people into my practice, other practitioners who I was sort of reluctant to do that for a while, but they've worked out great. They're talented in their own right, and that's taken a little bit of the pressure off of me. The other thing is I've had my own goals, my own sport goals. It used to be in triathlon and marathon running. Lately, it's been more in CrossFit and weight training. And so I'm always looking for new goals and new challenges for myself that are physical, because there's nothing I love more than getting a good sweat. And now the latest thing I'm energized by is new projects, which is, like new
Absolutely.
projects in the world of lacrosse, new projects in terms of becoming a thought leader. Those things keep my engine revved for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I love how we're getting connected through the sport of lacrosse. There's something amazing about that. I just going through the answers that you gave us there, the unscripted part of a session and sitting down is probably the biggest thing, because you can create so much structure in your life. And I think it's important to have that kind of foundation of structure, but also leave room for the openness. You don't know what's going to happen. So I really like how you talked us through that. And something that I really want to point out about your story and about who you are is, in your first answer, you talked about the importance of being curious and asking for help. And now you're creating a team at Greenepsych. I think that says something about you. It's a really cool thing to see that you keep that beginner's mind, that you're a blank slate from your clients to your teams. And there's so much, you can go so much further with others. So I really like that. As you progress and go deeper and deeper into your career now, like you were talking about, what are some things that you know now that you wish you knew when you were first getting started, whether that was during the career change from clinical to sport, or even before, if we were talking to a younger athlete? What are some things that you know now you wish you knew then?
To me as a younger athlete, or to younger athletes who are coming up?
I would say let's break it into two parts. For the younger athlete coming up, what is some advice you'd give for them? And then
Yeah.
what about the young professional? What is a piece of advice that you know now that you wish you knew then?
Yeah. Well, I think this sort of answers your question. What comes to mind, Mark, is um, I often say that the people that come to see me are great players, but particularly for the younger ones, no one's yet taught them how to compete.
Mm,
And I think even back in my day, we would have benefited from. Actually, we did. I'll tell that story in a minute. We actually did have somebody help us back when I was playing lacrosse in high school. But so I think one of the things that I offer these, particularly the younger clients, is an education on on the inner game, right?
mm,
Which is, they sometimes don't get in any sort of sophisticated way, um, and they're busy blaming themselves and thinking of themselves as wimps or cowards, for not, rising up when the lights are on. And of course, I don't want them to be thinking about themselves at all in such a way. I just say that no one's yet taught you how to manage the doubts. You know how to play well. You could teach me how to play, um, but no one's yet taught you how to manage the doubts, and that's where we need to focus. You've been so busy thinking you need to be confident and you need to be positive and you need to be like feel great. Um, so one of the things that I enjoy giving the younger athlete, um, that maybe I do wish I had more of, but was, this education on what goes into being a great competitor, not just a great player. Um, and and a lot of that is focused on how you manage the fear. And now I think more than ever, because of a number of reasons, because of social media, the professionalization of youth sports, sports specialization, um, the kids live in a lot of fear that if they're not recruited early enough, or if they're not putting up enough stats soon enough, not just that they won't get into the school of their dreams, but like their entire life will wind up going
right,
sideways
right.
because they didn't get into the school, or get to play at the level that they thought they were going to play. Um, so, when I can help somebody kind of reframe some of that and look at it differently, it's terrifically rewarding.
Yeah, pulled so far to the external for different reasons, right? And I think, I really like the idea of teaching how to compete. I've heard it said in a different way where many teachers will give homework, but not tell you how to do the homework, right? And they give you a deadline, but they don't
Yeah,
tell you how.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
one of the philosophies that I came up with, and I was actually on an echo bike one day when I came up with it, was that there's a difference between out of shape, in shape, then game shape, and then championship shape. And I brought up this idea of championship shape being calm in an uncalm place, right? I love sport at the final putt of the Masters, at the last 30 seconds of a game, because are you able to sync to your levels of training? I think it really shows up at those moments, and it's really championship shape. But it goes off the thread that you gave us on how to compete, because it's one thing to do the physicality part of it, the tactical part of it, but it's another to be psychologically ready. Listeners of this podcast, Dr. Greene, range from younger student athletes to adult professionals. So, on a more broad foundational level, what are some strategies you can give people that they should consider to increase their daily productivity, right? I like to talk about the difference between non-negotiables and having a foundation and then leaving room for the personality. But what are some things in your opinion that should be pillars to more energy or productivity throughout the day?
well, you're reminding me of this concept that I talk with athletes about called side games, and maybe this is a place that I could weave that
Absolutely.
into your question, Mark, about daily practices and such. So if you give me just a few minutes, I'll just explain what side games is,
Please
and
do.
I
Please.
won't. I try not to take up too much time with it, but side games for me are these additional games that we play. I'll put games in quote. These additional games that we play beyond the stated game that we're trying to play. So, for example, if I'm playing basketball and the stated game is basketball, and the goal is for me to try to score as many points, help my team as best as I can, get as many assists, play good defense. those are all goals that sort of serve the stated game. But what often happens for us, for our athletes that we help, is they're actually, while they're busy trying to play their stated game, they're also playing these additional side games. And by side games, I mean, and additional agendas, I mean, like in the background, trying to prove that they're good enough, trying to prove to the coach that they deserve more playing time, trying to prove that they're perfect, trying to impress their parents, trying not to disappoint a boss. I'm shifting from sport to business, trying not to make less money than they did the month before. And I have found great value personally and enormous value in the work that I do with teams and individual athletes, teaching them this concept of side games, because the idea is that the clearer you can get about what game you're playing, so to speak, the more fulfilled you're going to feel, the less burdened you're going to feel, and the more you're going to be moving down the path towards success. So in other words, if we put it back in the athlete context, if an athlete is so busy trying to prove how good they are to their coach, or trying to not embarrass themselves, which are all sort of examples of side games, if they could get clear that those games aren't worth playing, in many ways, athletes aren't even aware that they're playing those games. So that's part of my job, is to get them to see, you just thought you were playing basketball. You're not just playing basketball out there. You've got about 7 to 22 additional games you're playing. And I make a list for them and they check off on the list. And it's really powerful intervention, because they go, wow, I just thought I was trying to play hoops. I go, you're trying to, but look at these additional games you're playing. And then in terms of these side games, just to finish, we take a look at whether they're helping or getting in the way. In other words, Michael Phelps in the Olympics was playing side games called trying to be the most decorated Olympian ever, trying to please his sponsors. And we might argue that for Phelps, many of those games didn't interfere. If anything, maybe them pumped him up, made him focus even more in training, because he had already won a zillion golds, but he didn't want to just be ordinary. He was looking to be extraordinary. But for others, going for trying to, if you're a pro athlete, which I work with many pro and Olympic athletes, let's say, who are trying to please sponsors, right? You go to a game or a race, and now a big side game for you is trying to please your sponsors so that they're willing to put money behind you still. Now that game, for Phelps, maybe it was one way, but maybe for another athlete, that side game cost you too much.
Oh, gotcha.
And so then we take a look at, is that game worth it, not worth it? Where did that game come from? What's behind that game? Is it really about sponsors? Is it more about money? Is it really about money, or is it more about self-worth? Is it more about legitimacy? We try to break it down and unpack it so that they get to choose what games they play, and decide whether it's worth keeping, or can we find a way to sort of to ditch it. So to come back to your original question, I think of this myself in my own life. I will write down sort of in shorthand for me on one side of the page what's important and sort of what's not important on the other side. And I think about it in terms of games. What game do I want to play today, Mitch? And what game, Mitch, isn't worth playing today? Do you want to play the I'm looking to impress Mark game, so I better get on here and say some dazzling stuff game? Or do I want to play a different game that's a little bit more towards reminding myself of why I'm on with Mark? I don't have to be on with Mark. This isn't like I have to. I'm on with Mark because I do love exchanging ideas with like-minded folks. And I love to learn, and I love to offer people some of my learning experiences. And so, but if all I was trying to do here was trying to impress, I'd be a bundle of nerves and wouldn't be able to put my thoughts together. Does that I hope that kind of hits you in the right place.
It makes perfect sense. And the feeling is mutual, by the way. And what I would say is one of my side games right now, this moment, is to learn more about the side game. So let me ask you a question in which I like how you talked about clarity, right? There's this transitive property that I often bring up is simplicity equals clarity equals confidence. And you can't be confident if you're confused. You have to make it very simple. And that's what I liked about your two, what's important, what's not important. The acronym that comes to mind is WIN. Everybody wants to win, but what's important now, right? So when I look to unpack the side games a little bit. How can somebody gain control over the side game? So what is something an athlete or a person could do, say they're a business professional, to set up their surroundings, set up their environment so that they can play the right side game, if that makes sense, right? Because sometimes the environment doesn't allow them to choose the right side game. So is there anything you can give us on controlling the side game, on backing up the truck?
I think I get it. Well, I think I believe that we always have choice. So even though you might be working in a business that you don't want to be working in, or you're on a team that you maybe aren't getting enough playing time on, um, um, you still have choice. In fact, I was listening to one of your guests, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't recall his name, but I really loved what he had to say. I think he went to West Point. He was a coach.
Coach Adam Silva.
I think it him who was talking about being not just a great leader, but a great follower. We could sneak this into the notes or something, but he was talking about being a great follower. And I thought, well, there's like a side game like that someone could play that they maybe never thought of, because they're so busy trying to play the, I have to be a great leader game. I have to be like a starter game. And he was sort of offering up, something that might align if they're not playing as much as they want to, the game called how to be a great follower. So I do think that we always have we maybe have more choice than we realize. In other words, if you're on a team, you still have a choice. If you want to be on that team, you don't have to play on that team. And if you're going to be on that team, then let's choose the kind of games that are going to lead to energize you versus those that are energy sucks and take away from you. So I think I'm answering your question. I understand you're basically asking about how to stay aligned with the games you play.
Yes,
exactly. And what comes to mind is right. Surrounding yourself with people that also align with you and support the games you're playing. I just, what comes to mind are sometimes it can be challenging to do if you have coaches that don't align in the same way that with what side games you're trying to play, or people in your social circle who don't support or align with you. You have to make some tough choices about who to keep and who to ditch. These are some of the things that come to my mind.
Yeah, no, it is exactly what I was looking for, because the thread that I was looking to get at is that alignment, right? You want to have this certain goal, but meanwhile, all around your house, that's not what's available, right? Clean food is not available to you. You're not hanging out with the right people. You're constantly being pushed by someone to think about something that you don't have control over. And I think I love that you just said we still have a choice, right? Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl comes into mind, right? Where he basically has no choice, but he still has one inside out, right? So the fact that you touched upon alignment is huge, and it threads right into the next question really nicely. Is there a misconception, in your opinion, in the world of sports, right? We talked about what game we're playing. Are we playing a side game or the game that's really stated and the one that everybody's working towards? Is there anything that the general population of sports may have adopted, yet either science or research or something proves that's not true, right? For a longest time, let's say in strength and conditioning, there's a lot of people that were training the wrong energy system, right? Football players were running mile times, right? Why were they doing that? That doesn't serve them. So I guess my question is there anything on maybe the sports psychology front that you think is a misconception that people follow through with that might not necessarily be true?
Yeah, I think that people think that you need to think positive, and I know you've heard other people say this too. This idea that the way to get yourself going again is to be confident. That you need to be confident and think positively. And I think that, and a lot of athletes come to me, and their main request is, can I help them get more confident? And that because they feel as though they need to be more confident and positive in order to play well. And so I'd say that I don't think that's actually what we should contract around. I say I'm not sure that's what we should contract around in terms of working together. I think how we should get at this is if I can help you get better at managing the doubts. I think so. When someone says they need to be more confident, what I hear is they don't yet know how how best to manage the doubts,
Mhm.
and that the better they get at managing the doubts, the better they'll be able to, presumably or hopefully, to perform. And that, as you know, confidence comes after you do something, not before. If I
Right.
waited to feel confident to become a sports psychologist after being a clinician, I would still be a clinician,
Right.
right? If I waited for confidence to write my book, I would be likewise never writing one. So I do wind up talking about, so I talk about that misperception a lot, and I also talk um, about courage more than confidence.
Hmm.
That we don't have control over how confident we can be, but we do have something to say about how courageous we are, and that, and by definition, you can't be courageous except in the presence of fear, right?
Hmm.
That fear always precedes courageous action. So I've sort of trademarked this sort of, as you can see on my wristband, I know the audience can't, but it says courage over confidence.
Mm.
Um, and I steer athletes away from this idea that they need to feel confident to play well. And we spend a lot of time talking about what this idea of courage means to them, um, and what would it look like for them to be courageous? Who in their life have they seen as courageous? Is it Uncle Joe or Aunt Mary? Or and we go through a lot of examples of athletes who aren't confident and talk about it in the media, but find a way to win or play well. So I think that's a big area, and that's a big area of the book will be about, which is saying, let's stop with the I need to be confident stuff. Again, I'm not against confidence. If somebody's feeling confident, I'm getting out of their way and letting them do their thing. But those people don't seek me out, right? Right.
Sure.
My niche is for the people who've read the books, read the quotes, been told they need to be more confident, but still can't find a way to get on top of it. Those are my people. Those are people
Sure.
who've done all their homework, but still something is going on behind the scenes that gets in the way.
I love it. One of the ideas that come to mind, just because you were talking about doing something in the midst of fear, is kind of breaking down what fear is to someone. I heard Pitbull in a conversation with Tony Robbins talk about fear is either forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. And I think
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
goes back to the hand holding fear. You're going to have fear and then you do it anyways, right? Life in one word could be risk. Right, because what are you willing to sacrifice for either a greater gain? And you know, I think that is omnipotent among a lot of great performers in any field. Is
Yeah.
kind of like they chose, even though they
Yeah.
had the fear.
I
So
just want to add
go
just real
ahead.
quickly that I think one of the powerful interventions that I think, is that I get them to see that it's not them, so to speak, who's afraid. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I'll say to them, like, you show up to the game and so does your mind chatter. And if all you were with a big blob of mind chatter, you would have quit by now. But there's a part of you that knows that you can go out there and get some more ground balls and be more aggressive than you were last game. And so it does help to have a common enemy, which is this chatter. So when they say that, instead of saying I'm scared, I pay close attention to the language. We do get away from saying I'm afraid, I'm scared. We say my mind chatter is on duty. My mind chatter is saying this right now. My chatter is having a hell of a time now because it knows that there's a lot of uncertainty and is starting to worry about the stakes. So I don't even have, I'm very picky about the language they use. So I don't want them coming back and say, I'm really nervous or I'm scared. I want them to say that they're looking to play well, but their chatter is is also showing up and has its own thing to say.
Sure.
So that they don't, and it does help to have this common enemy or common foe. And I say to them, so our job is for me and you, the client, against your chatter. We're going to team up against your chatter. And, but we know how chatter is, and it's a formidable foe. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
It shows up when we need it the least,
Mm.
right? Just when we're all ready to go, it shows up and reminds us that there's a lot at stake and a lot could go wrong. So anyway, that's just the other piece about fear that I make sure is clear to them, that it's not them, so to speak. It's
Yeah.
their mind.
I love that separation. I mean, it goes off of what your mentor gave you, what you resist will persist type of thing.
Yeah.
We keep talking about having that kind of harmonious relationship with the mind chatter. Would you agree that mind chatter is a good thing in some regard?
Yes, I will often say to athletes, I say, I have some good news for you. And they wait, and I do the dramatic pause, and I say, I figured something out about, and I'll give an example that will basically have them, if I could figure out a way, I'll talk to your coaches, I'll talk to the league. Now, if you could play against maybe some seventh graders, and look, I'll figure it out so that you could still get the win, and it will count in terms of your league ranking. Let's take a tennis player. And you could still no one will know. It'll still show up as a win in the win column, but no one will know. And you could play against a seventh grader. And look, here's the good news. You won't have any chatter. Are you in or are you out? And they'll be like, well, I don't know. And I go, all right, you know what? Just play one match and then come back to me after maybe 2 matches and 3 matches and tell me what you think. And the long story short, without going on, but I do draw this out to make a point, right, which is, of course, they're going to come texting me and say, Doc, could you, I think this whole not having mind chatter thing isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And I'll say, why? They'll say, well, it's sort of boring or completely boring. There's no challenge. I'll go, yeah, but you told me you wanted to win. And they go, yeah, I do, but there's something missing. And again, we'll draw this out. And what's missing, right, is the challenge, right? Is the challenge. I go, but you didn't tell me you wanted a challenge. You told me you wanted to win and you wanted to get recruited. You didn't say shit about challenge.
Right.
And it turns out that maybe there's more to sport. There's maybe more than you care about than you realized. And it's quite an interesting conversation for that. The point being, anytime you're going to have a challenge, chatter is going to show up.
Right.
It's part of the competition picture. It's not a sign of trouble. So you're right. Yes, it's an opportunity. And
Sure.
I look at it as an opportunity to be courageous. We turn chatter on its head. I say, oh, lucky you. Today's the day you get to be courageous. And you can't be courageous except if you're having lots of chatter. So we spend a lot of time talking about those examples. I think that answers your question.
It definitely does. And I love it. Often talking about mind mechanic, that's a perfect mind mechanic. A mechanic goes underneath the car, changes a few things, and the car is running good as new. You come in there and you give them that positive twist on it. You change the mind mechanic and it looks great. What you gave us there in terms of the challenge made me think of 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson. One of his rules sounds a little weird. It's don't bother children while they're skateboarding. And you say, wow, how could that be a rule for life? And these kids that are skateboarding, they risk it all in that moment, right? They're either willing to break a bone or whatever. Meanwhile, the teachers don't want them to do down the 12 flights of stairs type of thing. So the idea is, as human beings, if it's too safe, we'll risk it even more, whatever that is. And now you're developing that relationship with the mind chatter between safety and challenge.
Yeah.
Turning it over to you in terms of courage, in terms of inspiration, resources, books. What do you do throughout the year? We already talked about what you do day to day, having goals, building a team at Greenepsych. But throughout the year, when you feel low in your energy or inspiration or motivation, are there any resources or books that you often turn to? It could be people that help you become more courageous.
Well, it's definitely the people in my life first. I know you talk a lot on this podcast about the importance of having quality, supportive relationships, and I am the sort of person who will immediately start thinking if I need support about who I want to call, and I call different people for different things. If it's business related, or it's personal, or it's family and parenting related, I just have go-to people that I will that I know I could use them as a resource and have them kind of give me good consult and good counsel. So that's the first thing that I think of. I also need to change my physical environment. I've learned over the years, I can't really just get away without getting away. In other words, I can't get away just sort of taking some time off at home or taking a half day. or yes, I mean, it helps me to go for a walk or go for a run, or work out or what have you. But there's nothing that gives me more value than physically changing my location. It doesn't have to be dramatic, like I have to go to Europe, but I could go an hour away and be away. Um, um, so I think that helps. My own personal advice to myself is often around asking myself, what am I resisting right now when I find myself stuck? What are you resisting, right? What are you not accepting right now, or having trouble accepting? And 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 what are the stakes that you sort of think are at play here? And I often need to remind myself, like I do my clients, that I'm often over dramatizing and futurizing all the possible fallout of whatever it is that might be. So I spend a lot of time thinking about resistance, and where am I fighting the forces that be, and where am I making things that have to be a certain way. So I'm pretty good counsel to myself, thankfully, and then I have these people in my life. And when it comes to reading books, I, like you, am someone who reads a lot about what other sports psych people and psych people are saying. But I also love to read, like David McCullough's book about the Wright brothers, because these are the people, obviously people know, who invented the airplane, and I get a lot of inspiration outside of the world of psych from people who are creative sorts, who are sort of getting out of their comfort zone. And these two guys, the Wright brothers, showed unbelievable courage. They failed time and time again. The US government wouldn't back them. They thought these two were Looney Tunes, and they kept crashing. And I try to expand my worldview by sort of reading a lot about other people and their journeys and their adventures. And then the last thing I will say, which almost could have been the first thing I should have said, is I get an unbelievable courage from my clients. When I start thinking about what some of them have overcome and the daily fight they're having behind the scenes that maybe no one knows about, even if it's somebody who's sort of in the public eye, but I know what they're working with. I think, my clients are the best inspiration for me, because they keep showing up, they keep wanting to talk, they keep putting themselves out there, making themselves vulnerable. So I don't want to be a hypocrite. So I try to do the same with the people that I seek counsel with.
Such a great answer. Thank you so much. I mean, the quote that comes to mind is, joy doubled, or joy shared is joy doubled, and then sorrow shared is sorrow halved. And I really like that. You talk about the pack there of getting it from your clients. I certainly get it from my clients and my peers. What you were talking about earlier of what am I resisting right now? I was listening to the author Robert Greene say in passing, and I thought it was the most important thing he said in the whole 2-hour podcast was 99% of your problems come from thinking. And I was like, wow, that's really good. That is really good. What you gave us in terms of the people you call, I like having that too, is that personal board of directors. Who are you calling in terms of getting you right? Because I think whatever you do for your clients or whoever you're teaching is also important that you're living that life too. And then physically changing your location. Dr. Versari, my mentor, she shared this simple line, but it's so good, is Mark, wherever you go, there you are. Right.
Yes.
So I think that's so important to keep in mind. I want to go towards you as a teacher. What are some of the phrases or quotes or sayings that you oftentimes are saying to other people? They come up over the years, maybe every single week. What are some of these phrases that you are often go to drive home points that really matter? Are there any message you find repeating oftentimes?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Yeah, actually, that was part of the book, because I thought, I keep saying this, if I could just get everybody who comes in all together in a group, we could
There you go.
take care of this much quicker.
Much quicker.
So yes, well, sort of the idea that I certainly get to the place where I I get them to see that the predictableness of chatter. So when they get to the space where they're thanking their chatter for sharing, that's certainly a line that I wind up getting to. The idea are asking themselves, are they making room for chatter? Are you making room for chatter? Is one of the things I'll often ask. I mentioned already the what you resist persists, what you let be lets you be. The side games piece I've already mentioned. Courage over confidence. I get a lot of really good feedback from people that they sort of took that into the game with them, this idea of this opportunity to be courageous, and then they focused on some of those kind of goals, those improvement type goals. Prove versus improve. I spend time making the distinction, as others have, and this isn't something that I've come up with, about proving versus improving, right? You know, where is your mindset going into the game? Is it more of a prove mindset than improve? I make a big distinction for the younger athletes about school versus sports. This gets to the controllables. That in school, generally speaking, for the smart cookies that I work with, if they go to class and they do their homework and they review for the test and they ask their teacher or professor for help if they're confused, unless the teacher's really pulling a fast one on them, they probably have a sense of what the outcome's going to be in some ways. You know, if they're ready or not, they kind of have a sense of where they're going to wind up and how they're going to wind up doing on the test. And then you move into sports. I have this giant whiteboard in my office, and we kind of play this out. And, you know, you can go to practice, you can hit the weight room, you can do the drills, you could watch video, you could ask your coach for help. But at the end of the day, there's so much more uncertainty, of course, in terms of the outcome. And I'll say to clients, if you're using the same mindset in school as you are for your sport, you may be missing something here. You're probably using the wrong one. We need a mindset that accounts for the uncertainty. And the fact that you just have that much less control, of course, over the result, which you know. Where in school, there's no one like trying to scratch out your answer before you write it down.
Sure.
If you have a big paper, you can stay up all night if you have to finish it. No one's going to sort of block you from that. But obviously, in the world of sports, you've got someone who's trying to kick your butt while you're trying to kick theirs. So we need to account for that. I think that, I know that's not a quote. I apologize for going on more than I should, but that's an area that I spend a lot of time in the distinction of between school and sports, and appreciating you need a specialized mindset for sports that maybe no one's yet taught you about.
Absolutely. And I think there's that transferable between sport and life. You know, sport, just like life, is that continuous series of problem-solving events. Coach John Wooden once said, teams don't lose, they just run out of time. I like that because you talked about pulling an all-nighter. And then Zig Ziglar comes to mind when he says that gratitude is the most healthy human emotion. And that made me think of your line or idea of thanking the chatter for sharing, right? That kind of gratitude, right? Where, wow, yeah, this is a bad situation, but can I be thankful for a bad situation? What a cool idea. One of the things I want to ask you is, outside of your work, do you find it easy to take off the sports psychologist cap, or do you find yourself deeply enthralled in the work even outside of your profession? Do you have any hobbies? I know you talked about David McCullough's Wright Brothers book, but do you find a good separation, kind of like you were talking about sport and school? Are you able to separate it for yourself, or do you find yourself too entrenched in it?
I don't find interestingly enough, I spend a lot of time outside of my client hours. Yes, reading things and paying attention to what other people are doing, but in a healthy way. I can ease it. For me, I define myself first as a parent before a psychologist. So for me, I'm more bent out of shape if my kids are bent out of shape than I am bent out of shape about or have trouble separating from my work. I mean, I care deeply, don't get me wrong, and I love my clients and I love what I do, but I am able to let it go. It's different as a parent if my kids though are struggling. That's harder for me. That's more challenging for me, and that's where I need people to support me. Whereas the work thing isn't much of a big deal, and or relative certainly to what I the way I define myself first as a dad.
A parent is only as happy as their least happy child, right?
That's it. That's it. Yes.
A more fun question before we get to wrapping it up is, if you could have dinner with guests, either dead or alive, 3 of them, who would you pick?
I would like to meet Michael Gervais, who is a psychologist out in the West Coast area, California, Seattle area, who seems to have a really cool practice and a really cool clientele, and does some really interesting things in that he works in business and he works in sport, and has an approach that seems like makes a whole lot of sense to me. So I'd love to spend time picking his brain. As you know, I'm starting to, talk a lot more with in the world of professional lacrosse, and I would love to meet the guys who are running the show at the PLL, the brothers Reveal, and because I guess similarly, they're both entrepreneurs and businessmen, and of course athletes. And I'd like to hear, their a little bit more about their, creative and entrepreneurial journey. So they're people who come to mind. And who else would I want to spend that kind of time with over dinner? It could be anyone, right? Not just a sport person.
Anyone, dead or alive.
I'll tell you what, I know this is going to sound corny, but having my kids, there's nothing I get greater pleasure than going out to dinner with my daughters and my wife to a restaurant that we love. My kids would, if they heard this, they would say, that's so true. All I want is everybody together. And when you're a parent and your kids are here and it's a pandemic and you can't hug them and you can't even take them to dinner because you can't go inside, I feel even more of this yearning and longing to be with them and to spend time with them in a normal way. So, those would be the people as well.
I don't think that's corny at all. It shows the kind of person you are. That's powerful. And let's make the connection to the Ravels for you. I'm a big fan of Michael Gervais' Finding Mastery podcast. Dr. Versari knows Michael Gervais very well. So hopefully we can make that connection as well. Nice. I got 2 other questions for you. And one I want to put on to you. Is there a question I did not ask you that you wish I did or I should have?
Yes, there is a question you've completely ignored, and I'm somewhat insulted by it. Because I wanted to make sure your guests knew that if it wasn't for COVID, I was going to be inducted into my high school's Hall of Fame, Athletic Hall of Fame, for our boys lacrosse championship years at Dwight Englewood School in Englewood, New Jersey.
Wow.
So of course I'm kind of teasing you because, but I did want to just quickly throw in there in terms of lacrosse. While that is true, we were getting inducted. I played a lot of sports growing up, and I was a very good athlete growing up. I say humbly, and I played on a lot of teams. And I got asked to join the lacrosse team because the lacrosse coach saw me playing in other sports and saw the transferable of the skills to lacrosse. And the guys would walk past the tennis court where I was playing on the way to the lacrosse field and make fun of me for playing tennis. And between them making fun of me and the lacrosse coach wanting me, I switched into my junior year to play lacrosse.
Awesome.
And I joined this team. I did not know anything about lacrosse. I switched into this high school. I didn't have lacrosse. These guys were playing lacrosse when they were young. And these guys were terrific. And I wound up being on this elite lacrosse team because of these guys who were, some went on to play in college, and it was the richest sport experience probably in my life. It was really a magical couple of seasons for me, learning how to play the game, learning to get pretty good. I was a good athlete. I wasn't like a great lacrosse player, but I was a good athlete. So I was serviceable and had a role on the team and contributed. But I got to witness these guys who were at the top of their game in our area at the time, play lacrosse, and just in awe of them, in awe of their attitude. like that we're going to mess you up in terms of them backing it up and messing up the other team. It was just a wonderful sport experience for me. And the last thing I'll just say about it is we had a guy named Dr. Nate Zinzer who was writing his dissertation at the time. He's now the director of the performance psych program at West Point. He was writing his dissertation at that point. And he told, so this was sports psych before I ever knew sports psych.
Right.
And we were so good that we got complacent when you'd play against teams, right? You'd get up by 7 goals easy, and then you'd kind of start farting around. And he gave the team this 1 goal down sort of mantra, attitude, that you're always playing as if you're 1 goal down. And while I didn't think it was like the most amazing thing, it took over the team though. The guys who needed to hear that the most.
Oh, wow.
Took that. And we'll quote it to this day. When we get together for beers, they'll talk about Zinzer's 1 goal down.
Oh, wow.
You can have him on the podcast. And that kept this team from underperforming. It went on to win state championships and stuff. And all the way back in 1987, I had a sports psychologist who found becoming the West Point sports psychologist, helping our team. It's sort of a funny thing that now I'm trying to do the same for others. It's a kind of a cool story. Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And I'll tell you what, they say sport has a way of connecting the world a way that nothing else does. I would say lacrosse is the sport that connects the world in ways something nothing else does. And I love the 1 goal down mentality. The guy who put a stick in my hand, he's episode 1 of this podcast, still a very good friend of mine. He always challenged me to be the one, right? So if we can combine 1 goal down and be the one, maybe you got into something special there.
Absolutely.
So the last question, through your research, your experience, and your obvious expertise, you've probably seen so many great performers and performances. So based on your experience, how would you define greatness? What does greatness look like to you?
Yeah. I think of some of the performances that comes to mind, Mark, of some of the Olympians I worked with, and not because they're Olympians per se, but because, and I had the luxury of being down at the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio with athletes and some of the performances, and these weren't necessarily people who podiumed and medaled, but it was the performances that on the biggest stage in the face of adversity, found a way to just get the job done as best as they could under the circumstances. Really showed more courage when there was lots of reasons for them to lose confidence and to just sort of mail it in or pack it in. So, I think the definition of success is really in those places where the adversity hits, having the courage to sort of try to squeeze out as much out of your performance as you can, distinguishing that from whether you wound up on a podium or wound up in first place or won the game. And that's what keeps me going with these athletes. It's not that everybody I work with winds up winning the game and holding a trophy. I mean, far from it. And it's fun when that does happen. But when they could come back to me and say, I didn't win, but my mental game, it wasn't my mental game that kind of got in the way. It was with these other factors. That to me makes me feel good, or at least they feel like they now could come back and say, all right, now I know where I need to keep working. My left hand definitely needs work. It wasn't a matter that my mental game, but it was the fact that I couldn't switch hands, or that, my accuracy is just off because I'm maybe not, shooting in the right, from the right arm angle or what have you.
Sure.
So those are the successes and the fulfillments that I get the most out of in working with athletes, and even if they don't make it, to their big dreams.
And I love that, wherever you are, be all there, regardless of the outcome. Wherever you are, be all there. Dr. Greene, thank you so much for your time. I know I took a lot of it. I look forward to the future of our relationship growing, and thank you. The word of the day for me is courage, and I appreciate having you on.
Thank you very much.